we're going to see how to use Excel's solver, which is an add-in for Excel. The first thing we need to do is add the solver. So I'm going to click File and then Options, and that will bring up this window. I'll click in Add-ins, then I'll click Solver Add-in down here. And now I'll click Go, and I'll click Solver Add-in, then I'll click OK. And under the Data tab, that adds the solver, which you can see here. This is the example that we're going to use, and I'm going to go through and explain what's happening here. Basically, we have three products, A, B, and C. These products require particular parts. Each one requires parts P1 through P4. And the products require a certain combination of each part. So for example, product A requires 2 part 1s, 1 part 2, 1 part 3, and 4 part 4s. And you can see for B, it has a particular combination of parts it requires, and then there's product C, which also requires a certain combination of parts. And right here is the profit we make on each product. So this is profit broken out by product. So if you sell one product A, it's a $10 profit, and one product B is a $25 profit, and so on to C, which is 50. And we have our quantities of each product. So 40 of product A, and we can change these quantities. So they're highlighted in yellow, which means we can change them. And those are the only ones we can change. It's basically our dial to adjust what's going to happen here. So we have a limited inventory of each part, which we can see here. And then we have the ones we've used and then what's left over. Now let's look at the calculations of how this works. So there's no calculations in this area here. There is a calculation here, which you can see up here. So if I highlight the formula, you can see the cells that are getting worked on. For part 1, to figure out how much of the inventory we've used, basically you take the quantity of part A times the number of part 1s that it needs. So 40 times 2, and then you just keep working down each part, plus 10 times 4 plus 60 times 1. And that's going to give you how much of part 1 we need. And so for this particular quantity, this particular set of quantity for each product, this is the inventory we need, 180. This is another formula that's a simple subtraction of part 1 inventory minus what we require will give us our remaining. And so there's the calculations, and all of these are calculated the same way, and all of these are calculated the same way. Down here we have profit based on how many products we sold. So this is profit per product based on the quantity sold. So 40 times 10 is 400, and that's how much we make for selling 40 part A's. $250 is what we'll make in profit for selling 10 part B's, so 10 times 25. And finally we have our part C, and 50 times 60 is 3,000. Then we add these up and we get 3650. Our goal here then is to figure out what is the best combination of quantity that will maximize our profit. This is what we're after, without giving us a negative number in our remaining. So let's see how this works real quick. If I try to do 50 of A, let's see what happens with our profit. So our profit goes up, and we're now out of part 2s, which means basically we can't do anything more with this. We've just maxed out. We could decrease this to 45, which would bring in some more part 2s, and that also decreased our profit. So here if I go with, say, 11 product B's, So our profit just increased a little. We have 2 more of these left, but we can already see if I go to 12, this requires 3. That's going to give us a negative number here because we only have 2. So if I go to 12, we end up with this negative number, which we don't want. So there's a better way to do this kind of problem solving where we need to maximize this number right here, total profit, by changing these values. So you can see there's a number of combinations we can go through changing the quantity of each product and kind of guessing at what would happen with our remaining quantity. So if something goes negative, then we back off and we adjust something else. But that's very time consuming. It's also not efficient, and we're all about productivity. So what we're going to do now is use the solver. I'm on my data tab and I'll click the solver, which brings up this window. The first thing I'm going to do is set the objective, which is going to be profit. We're after maximum profit. So I'll click here and then click our profit cell. And now I'll click back over here to show our window again. So this is the end result that we're after, the profit. And we're going to maximize profit, which is checked, so that's fine. That's good. And then we want to select the cells that we can actually change, which are the 3 in yellow. So I'm going to highlight those. I just drag across, and that sets up a range. And then I'll click again. And now we need to set some constraints, because we do have constraints. The constraints that we want to add are going to be, we'll start first with remaining. We can't have a negative number here because we have a finite amount of inventory. So we can't choose more than that. We can't, for example, choose more than 300 of part 1. We can't have 310, which would give us a negative 10 number. So what I'm going to do is add, and again I'm going to select the cell range, which is this one. I'll click that we want this to be greater than or equal to 0. Because a 0 number is fine. That just means we've completely depleted whatever the amount of inventory is for that part. And I'll click OK. So there we have a constraint on our inventory remaining. Now we need to set up a constraint for our quantity because we want it to be greater than or equal to 0 as well. We can't have a negative quantity of product A, for example, so we don't want negative numbers. So I'll click Add and select the range. Then I'll say again, greater than 0, and click OK. Now we have everything set up for the solver. We've got our profit cell here, which is what we're after, and we want to maximize profit. Then the cells that can be changed we have here, which is our quantity, and we have 2 constraints. We have a constraint first on the inventory left over not being less than 0, which is the same as saying greater than or equal to 0. And we also have a constraint on our quantity not being less than 0. And again, the same as saying greater than or equal to 0. So I'm going to click Solve, and Solver has completed. And I'll say Keep the Solver Solution. And what I'm also going to do on this report is select Answer, just so we can take a look at that in a little bit. I'll click OK. And you can see what the solver came up with. It came up with 5,000 compared to what we had earlier, which was around 3,700, and doing a lot of back and forth trying combinations of quantity. The solver says just take 100 of product C and don't worry about products A and B. They're just not worth it. So now all we have to manufacture is product C. So if this was an analysis to figure out which products are viable out of the 3 before we ever set to manufacturing, or before maybe we ever set up our floor to manufacture anything, or which machines we'll need, right here we already know we're saving ourselves a ton of time because A and B don't even fit into the equation based on our initial analysis of what's required for A and B. So all of this production goes away and we focus on this production only. So that's how the solver can certainly help in figuring out these kinds of problems and how to solve them. And as long as you can set up your restrictions, your constraints, so that it doesn't do anything strange, and a lot of the times it's going to be not going below 0. Now, we did tell it to generate an answer report, and it generates it into a tab. So I'm going to go ahead and click on this, and we can see here what we have. It shows our original value, which was 3,700, compared to the solver's maximum of 5,000. And then we can see our original values here as well. And then this is what we eventually come to with the solver. And these are mainly the two that you'll be most interested in, what you start off with and then what the solver eventually ends up with. So that's the solver and how to use it. And certainly helpful when you have something like this, that you've got a particular set of cells that you can change, and they affect a few other areas of cells, and just like we had here with remaining inventory and then profit. There was a lot of interlinking there between the formulas that were built up for this, and solver handled it just fine.